The little girl had not moved her fingers in 3 years. Doctors had called it permanent. Specialists had shaken their heads with the kind of polite sorrow reserved for the hopeless. The world's best hospitals had tried and failed. And yet, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, in a sunlit therapy room that smelled faintly of antiseptic and hope, her hand trembled. No one noticed at first, except the single father kneeling in front of her, his worn-out sneakers squeaking softly against the polished floor. He saw the twitch, he held his breath, and in that fragile, suspended second, everything changed. Before we go any further, if you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in miracles born from ordinary hearts, take a moment to like this video, comment where you're watching from, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this remind us that compassion can rewrite destiny. Arman Malik had never imagined he would one day stand inside the private rehabilitation wing of the prestigious Malik Neurocare Institute in the heart of the city. The building bore the name of its founder, the billionaire tech magnate Zoya Malik, whose empire stretched from artificial intelligence labs to luxury real estate. Her face often graced magazine covers, framed by sharp ambition and flawless confidence. But none of those glossy headlines ever mentioned her daughter. 7-year-old Alina had once been a bright, energetic child, running barefoot through marble hallways, her laughter echoing between chandeliers. Then came the accident. A late-night collision on a rain-soaked highway outside the city. A driver who fell asleep, twisted metal, sirens slicing through the darkness. Zoya survived with minor injuries. Alina did not wake up for 3 weeks. When she finally opened her eyes, the world she returned to was not the one she had left. A spinal cord injury had robbed her of movement from the waist down and weakened her upper body severely. Doctors from London, New York, and Tokyo were flown in. Experimental therapies were tried, millions were spent. But progress stalled. Eventually, the word that haunted Zoya's nights was spoken quietly in consultation rooms: irreversible. Arman entered their world not as a savior, not even as a specialist, but as a replacement. A temporary physical therapy assistant hired after the previous therapist quit under pressure. Arman was 35, with gentle eyes and a face lined by hardship. He had lost his wife to a sudden illness 4 years earlier, leaving him to raise his 5-year-old son, Samir, alone. Medical bills had drained his savings. He worked 2 jobs, mornings at a public clinic, evenings doing home visits. When the offer came to assist at Malik Neurocare for triple his usual pay, he accepted without hesitation, even though it meant longer hours away from Samir. The first time Arman saw Alina, she sat by a wide window overlooking the city skyline, her thin shoulders slumped, her small hands resting lifelessly on a soft blanket. Her eyes were old, too old for a child. Zoya stood nearby, perfectly dressed as always, but exhaustion clung to her like a shadow. She barely acknowledged Arman, offering a nod that felt more like an evaluation than a greeting. The challenge was clear. The institute expected measurable results. Zoya expected nothing less than a miracle, and Arman, though he never said it aloud, knew that miracles were not summoned by wealth. They were built slowly, painfully, through patience and belief. In the beginning, Alina resisted everything. She refused exercises, turned her face away, and sometimes closed her eyes as if the world itself was too heavy. Many therapists before Arman had treated her like a project, a case file, a puzzle to be solved. Arman chose something different. He brought a small, faded soccer ball from home, the kind his son loved. He rolled it gently across the therapy mat and told Alina about Samir's clumsy kicks and exaggerated goal celebrations. He spoke not as a professional, but as a father who understood the language of children. Days passed, then weeks. Arman worked tirelessly, guiding her arms through repetitive motions, encouraging the faintest contractions in her muscles. He celebrated millimeters of improvement as if they were miles. Sometimes, after exhausting sessions, he would rush home to help Samir with homework, cook dinner, and tuck him into bed before collapsing onto the couch, his body aching. There were nights when he wondered if he was chasing something impossible. There were mornings when Zoya's distant, scrutinizing gaze made him question his methods. Zoya watched everything. She had built companies from scratch, she recognized dedication. But she also recognized failure. She had seen hope rise and shatter too many times to allow herself to believe again. Yet something about our man unsettled her. He did not treat her daughter as a broken investment. He treated her as a child. One afternoon, while adjusting a support brace on Alina's wrist, Arman noticed the slightest resistance in her fingers. It was subtle, like a whisper of movement beneath stillness. He asked her to focus, to imagine holding a paintbrush, dipping it into bright colors. He described a sunrise spreading across a blank canvas. For the first time, Alina's eyes flickered with curiosity instead of resignation. Progress was not dramatic. It was painstakingly slow. A finger twitch, a stronger grip around a foam block, the ability to lift her arm an inch higher than the week before. But in rehabilitation, inches are revolutions. Behind closed doors, the Institute's board questioned whether continuing such intensive therapy was cost-effective. Even for a billionaire, resources were finite. Zoya faced pressure from investors and advisors who believed it was time to accept reality. She sat alone in her penthouse office one night, city lights shimmering below, and wondered if she was being selfish, clinging to hope for herself rather than for her daughter. Meanwhile, Arman faced his own crisis. Samir fell ill with a severe infection that required hospitalization. The irony was cruel. Arman spent his days helping a billionaire's child fight for movement, and his nights worrying whether he could afford the best care for his own son. He considered quitting the institute to take on more shifts at the public hospital. Guilt gnawed at him. How could he justify dedicating so much time to someone else's child when his own needed him? When Zoya learned of Samir's condition through a nurse who mentioned Arman's distracted demeanor, something shifted inside her. For the first time, she saw beyond the uniform and credentials. She saw a father stretched thin by love and responsibility. Without announcing it publicly, she arranged for Samir to receive treatment at her institute's pediatric wing, covering the expenses quietly. She did not tell Arman it was her doing. The day Samir was discharged, healthy and smiling, Arman returned to Alina's therapy room with renewed determination. He felt indebted, though he did not know to whom. He poured every ounce of gratitude into his work. And then came that Tuesday afternoon. The sunlight streamed through the tall windows, warming the room. Arman had positioned Alina's hand around a soft therapy ball. He guided her gently, asking her to imagine squeezing it to send a signal to her legs. He had said these words 100 times before, but this time something was different. Her fingers trembled. It was faint, almost invisible, but Arman saw it. He froze, afraid that even breathing too loudly would break the spell. Slowly, with tears blurring his vision, he encouraged her again. Her fingers tightened, just slightly, around the ball. Zoya, who had been reviewing emails on her tablet in the corner, looked up at the sudden stillness. She saw Arman's expression and rushed forward. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then it happened again. A deliberate squeeze. It was not walking. It was not a dramatic leap from the wheelchair. It was a small, fragile movement. But it was voluntary. It was hers. Zoya's composure shattered. The woman who had negotiated billion-dollar deals without flinching sank to her knees beside her daughter. Tears streamed down her face, unrestrained and raw. Years of suppressed grief poured out in silent sobs. She pressed her forehead against Alina's hand as if it were the most precious thing in the world. From that day, momentum built. Muscles awakened like seeds after rain. Therapists adjusted programs. Neurologists reassessed scans in disbelief. Over the following months, Alina regained significant strength in her upper body and partial sensation in her lower limbs. With braces and support, she learned to stand for a few trembling seconds. Each milestone felt like a sunrise after endless night. The media eventually caught wind of the miracle recovery. Headlines praised cutting-edge technology and advanced research. Interviews requested statements from specialists. But Zoya knew the truth. Technology had helped, yes. Expertise had mattered. But the turning point had been belief, the relentless faith of a man who refused to see her daughter as permanently broken. At a private ceremony at the Institute, Zoya announced the launch of a foundation dedicated to providing long-term rehabilitation for children from low-income families. She named it the Arman Hope Initiative, despite his protests. She spoke openly about the power of compassion, about how healing requires more than machines and money. It requires humanity. Arman remained humble. He continued his work, balancing his career with fatherhood. Samir often visited the institute, becoming friends with Alina. They would sit side by side drawing pictures, one child relearning movement, the other grateful for a second chance at health. Years later, when Alina took her first assisted steps across the therapy room, supported by parallel bars and sheer determination, Zoya stood nearby, hands clasped over her heart. Armand stood on the other side, guiding but not carrying, because that was the essence of his gift. He did not perform miracles, he created space for them. If this story has touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Your engagement helps these messages of hope reach more people who might be fighting their own silent battles. And before we reach the end, I have a special request. Comment the word "believe" below if you think compassion can change lives, no matter how impossible the situation seems. The true miracle was never just in Alina's fingers moving. It was in a grieving father choosing to care despite his own pain. It was in a powerful mother learning to trust hope again. It was in two families, worlds apart in wealth, meeting in the simple, sacred space of love. Because sometimes, the greatest miracles are not flashes of divine intervention. They are the quiet, persistent acts of kindness that refuse to give up. And in that sunlit therapy room, where a small hand once trembled against all odds, a billionaire broke down in tears, not because she had money to spend, but because she had finally witnessed something priceless. A miracle born from a single dad's unwavering heart.